Trial Lawyers University, where the Titans come to train. Produced and powered by LawPods.
Well, it's the day after the 4th of July, so it's July 5th here when we're recording this. We got Harry Plotkin with us today, and Harry and I have been knowing each other a long time, longer than I even remembered, because while we were getting ready for this podcast, Harry reminded me that about 10, 12 years ago, he was working for the defense on a trial that I was involved with, a good friend of mine, Connell Doyle, well, tell us your memory of it, Harry, since like you actually have a memory of it, and you just told me I had no memory of you being there. So what's your memory of that case?
Yeah, no, we were talking the other day about my kind of evolution as a consultant, and that was one of the one or two cases that really made me realize I'm doing I shouldn't be working for defense anymore. My heart's not in it. I hate doing what I'm doing on this side of it. It doesn't feel right. It's one of those cases where I'm sitting in there and the defense lawyer's not listening to me, and I don't believe in the case, and I'm like, I don't even want. Do I want this case Do I want to defense this case? Not really. So I shouldn't be doing this anymore. But so I'm glad you guys did well in that case. Yeah, that was one of the ones. But sometimes you need those kind of things to open your eyes again and make you realize I need to make a change in what I'm doing. So yeah.
Yeah, that opened my eyes because that was the first case because I was there for the whole time with my buddy Connell. I wasn't co-counsel, but I was kind of like the silent second chair who was at the table all the time. And so it was the first real major civil trial. I got to witness all the movements and the experts and the positioning and the negotiation. But it really worked out great because he got it was around $26 million, which was a lot of money back then. I realized that's it's like a broken toe verdict these days in some places. But for David D. Robertus, he gets a person gets a little upset about losing their job. He gets some $40 million. He's just, But I'm saying way back when it was a great result. And Connell. It was great to be with him and witness him in the courtroom. But that was a history I didn't remember. But you and I have known each other for a while when I was living in Los Angeles, and you work do the consulting for a lot of my friends, to say the very least. And so you've had quite a success doing it, and they all swear by you, how invaluable you are. But from the outside, if you don't see it, you don't really understand what it is that you're doing with what you're helping people. So how did you get into this whole trial consultant, jury consultant business?
Yeah, so I fell into it just like pretty much every jury consultant I've ever talked to. There's no little kids, putting a picture on the refrigerator. I want to be a jury consultant when I grow up. I didn't even know I was actually doing it before I knew that it existed. I was actually working for a company of expert witnesses in Santa Monica. These guys were expert witnesses who testified to really super boring things. They were PhD economists. I was just crunching the numbers for them on a bunch of data on class actions and employment class actions and all kinds of things like that. And some of the lawyers that were hiring us were getting in touch with me, found out I had a background in psychology. And so they were asking me, how do I explain this complex stuff that your boss is testifying to a jury? They were having me, make demonstrative exhibits for them and how to explain it. But I remember when I went into my boss and asked him, how do you make sure that the juries understand? How do you tailor it to a jury? One of my bosses gave me a look like, what the hell are you talking about? Jury? I don't think about jury, And so I was doing that for a long time. And one of them was nice enough to finally tell me, what you're doing now is actually a job called jury consulting. I had no idea. And so I was lucky enough then, just by coincidence, a couple of months later, I had a friend of mine that I went to school with who was working for a big jury consulting company, was leaving to start a smaller jury consulting company with a couple of consultants, asked me to join him, and the rest is kind of history. So just totally fell into it, but love doing it.
Got it. And so your background, you said you have some background in psychology, but what else is, because you went to Duke, so it means you're a good high school student. We know how smart you are, but you're definitely good in high school to go to Duke. Got some good grades. So what did you study at Duke that kind of prepared you for this course?
Right. I had a double major. One was economics and statistics, and that's kind of what I was doing with that first job with the experts. But my primary passion was psychology and marketing. I had a certificate in something called marketing and management or something like that, some kind of marketing. I always thought that I was going to maybe help come up with ad campaigns or marketing or how to consumer decision making, but jury decision making is way more interesting, and I just love how competitive it is. So that was my background, but I just, like I said, fell into legal just by luck. That was my first job, was in legal, so I started working with lawyers.
Well, that makes sense. And so you've been doing this since when did you really start formally consulting? What year was that?
I started taking over as the consultant for that company. I spent a couple of years just sort of in the background, just soaking up information and going to focus groups and trials. I started kind of being the consultant there in 2004. In 2006 is when I started my own practice. And so, yeah, 18 to 20 years or so that I've been doing it, nothing but 100% juries.
And at one point you said around what year did you switch from being both sides to just plaintiffs?
It was kind of a little bit of a slow evolution, but probably, 11, I think that trial that we talked about was like 11 years ago. Because at the beginning, I would just take literally any case that came in. Plaintiff, defense, did some criminal for sure. Could be patent cases, boring, breach of contract case, anything, whatever it was. And I would help in any way that I could. So, but then probably about 11 years ago or so, or maybe 12 years ago, is when I just started to kind of realize, what am I doing? I was working with more and more plaintiff lawyers, and some of the guys at Cala started to use me and spread my name around. And then I started to kind of know people. And I think probably about 9 or 10 years ago is when I pretty much cut it off and said, I'm not doing any more defense anymore. It took a while, though, for the word to spread and for defense lawyers to stop getting in touch with me, because even today, occasionally someone will somehow not know that I only do plaintiff, and they'll get in touch. So, yeah.
Crazy if somebody not know that you're a plaintiff's jury consultant.
Yeah, some don't. Yeah, but I'll set them straight though when they get in touch. Yeah.
And how many juries in your 20 years or so you've been doing this? How many juries would you say would you estimate that you helped select?
Probably in person, I would say 700 and something, over 700, definitely more than 500, probably not quite 1,000 yet. I mean, I used to probably do, 40 juries a year. Now I'm a little more selective and try to put quality over quantity, but I still probably do pick 25 to 30 a year. And I've been doing it, almost 20 years. So it's probably, it's in the high hundreds.
High hundreds. All right. So you have some experience here. And so how would you say, well, when you consult with somebody, tell us how that works. When somebody calls you up, they got the case of their dreams. They're hoping to get the right jury because they can't get the right verdict without the right jury. So somebody calls you up. Let's say it's a new client, though. It's not a David D. Roberta, somebody that you're basically family members with, who you can read their minds. New person calls you up and says, hey, I got this big case and I want you to consult on it. What kind of consulting do you offer and how does it work?
Sure. So these days, just in the last couple of years, I only come in on a case where I know I'm going to be there for jury selection. I don't really do I found that if I give a little bit of advice here and there, or just send them some voir dire questions, the results are just not nearly as good as if I'm there. So I try to less cases, but more involvement. But the first thing that I always ask for is I say, send me a couple of things about the case from your side, but especially from the defense side. Because a huge part of my job is helping the lawyers to understand, what your weak points are. Because a lot of lawyers, I mean, I'm sure you see this too. What's the defense going to say? What's the weaknesses of the case? And they're like, nothing. There's no weaknesses. The defense has nothing to say. And you're missing something if that's what you're thinking. So my job is to kind of sometimes be the devil's advocate and say, these are the things you got to worry about. Like, this is a big deal, And sometimes I'll be like, who are the witnesses that corroborate what this plaintiff is saying? And they'll look at me like, well, it's just the plaintiff that's saying that. It was like a meeting or something, where supposedly the manager, said something racist or sexist or whatever. And I'm like, that's a big problem, And so my job is to kind of spot the problems. And then, because if I can't spot the problems, then I can't spot the jurors who are going to be problems for you. And so I first kind of get to know the case. I ask a bunch of questions. They're probably pretty tough questions. They're probably like, oh, sometimes if it's a new lawyer, they might be thinking, man, is this guy working for the defense here? Because he's asking me some pretty tough questions. But that's how I help. I believe in the case, but I'm going to push pretty hard. And so once I understand the case and understand all that stuff, then I can give them advice on jury selection and get them ready and write their mini opening or do a focus group or help them frame the case or deal with the problems in the case up front, so that you can frame around the big problems, and so that by the time the defense gets up, the jury's like, who cares? I already know these defenses. Who cares?
So the process, though, because I know that you do some bigger data focus groups or in-person focus groups. So tell us about, because like David D. Roberta says, hey, I only do the 50-person online focus groups. I don't do anything in person anymore. I don't need to. So I know
Yes.
that, but sometimes you still do it in person. So kind of how's that setup work in person,
Sure.
big medium data, stuff like that?
Right. It depends on the lawyer. I mean, not every case do I do a focus group, but I mean, they're incredibly helpful. And so I kind of do three kinds of focus groups. I do traditional focus groups. Those are usually early on in the case. And those are ones with just me talking to a smaller group of jurors, maybe a couple of groups in a day, where no lawyers presenting the case. I'm just walking the jurors through some of the facts of the case in a really neutral way and saying, hey, what do you think about this? Do you think that, to kind of learn how the jurors reacting to the basic facts of the case and how are they judging what the defendant did? What do you think the defendant should have done? Like, I have one coming up, for example, that with a school shooting. And, so I'm going to be asking them questions like, uh, you know, it was at a basketball game at night. Should a school have security, for basketball games at night? And how many should they have for a crowd of this size? And like, should they be how well should they be trained? Should they be police officers? Should they be private security? Is it okay to just have kind of these like school employees? And what should the plan be? All this kind of stuff. So the jurors we're understanding like what are the things that the defense did that they actually get mad about? Which are the things that they're like that's not a big deal? What do they need to know more about? All that kind of stuff. Um, that's one type. Another type, as you kind of get closer to trial, when you want to actually test how you're framing the case, is doing kind of what I call a mock test, where you're putting on dueling plaintiff and defense presentations and having the jurors make decisions and deliberate, and I discuss it with them. So they're actually coming to a verdict, in those kind of cases. Um, and then the third type is these online, big data online case studies where we have a really big group of jurors and we run it by them online. And the way that I do it, we talked about this is a little bit differently than some others maybe, is I really focus on jury profiling for jury selection, go really deep. So I have, these 50 or 100 jurors come online. They fill out this really long survey of like 250 to 300 questions that might be a big deal in jury selection. So that when they read the case and they make decisions and they give you tons of feedback, then I can go run it and do an analysis of what are the kind of the key things that show you, who a really good juror is or a bad juror, or what things don't matter at all in jury selection. So those are and that's the online case studies are the only way that you can really profile. If someone asks me, I need to figure out what kind of jurors are good for me. That's the only way to do it. Bringing in 12 jurors or even 20 jurors for a focus group is not going to tell you anything. Like, oh, that one, Hispanic juror was really bad for us, so we don't want a Hispanic guy. So you're like, that's like one person. You can't draw conclusions from a really small group. But with the big data, you can do that really well.
How is the studies that you conduct, how are they different than like, what, John and Alicia Campbell do with, they just launched their new book with Claggett called Jury Ball. And so how is those big data studies different than what you do, if you know?
Sure, yeah, and I love the work that they do, and I work on a lot of cases that use them, and I recommend them a lot of times for cases because I don't like to do a ton of them, but when I use mine is when we really want to go really deep on jury selection. I think mine, theirs is focused really on getting a ton of good data and what are the arguments that matter, and they do a great job of valuation and how much money should you be asking for, and are you asking for too much, and all those things. I don't really focus on that, but I focus on, like I said, the kind of the jury selection part of it is one big part. I have them fill out. I mean, I tailor all these jury questionnaire questions that they fill out for each case. And so, like I said, the jurors we're testing like 300 potential things in a case. So it could be like, let's say it's a, police shooting case. And I'm asking the jurors, everything from, have you been the victim of a crime? Do you have police officers in your family? How do you feel about all these things and force and guns and everything like that? And, how do you feel about, the, Blue Lives Matter, to everything like that, to, we're pretty much everything. I mean, the full gamut of things. Opinions, experiences, a lot of things that even wouldn't be on your radar that sometimes become really important. And then on the back end of it, I have them fill out this really extensive bunch of questions about how they feel about the case, so we can identify what are the key issues or arguments that actually matter to their verdicts. Because you'd be surprised, we find out a lot of times that things that the lawyers think are important aren't important at all. Like for example, in a case, could be like, hey, whether a juror thought that this trucking company did a good job training their truck drivers or did a lousy job actually didn't really matter. The verdicts are kind of the same for the jurors who agreed or disagreed with that question. But here are the things that matter. So mine are more geared toward 100% trial, more toward jury selection. If I want to do that, like with David, that's what he really likes to see. I'll do that. But if it's just, hey, I want to get a ton of feedback from a ton of people and get some great feedback, I think John and Alicia do a great job.
Okay. And so the 20 years you've been at this, how would you say that, your methodology and processes have evolved in that?
That's a great question. I've been thinking about this a lot, because I'm always learning as a jury consultant. I'm always looking back on cases that I worked on. And even if I felt like I did a great job then, I'm like, 10 years ago, what the heck was I doing? Like, what was I asking these stupid questions? I would never do that now. But I think the biggest thing for me, the biggest turning point was like kind of during COVID when we started to get these great jurors. Jurors kind of got better. And I realized, jury selection is no longer for me just deselection, because for many years I kind of subscribed to the thinking that the only point of jury selection, the only thing that you want to do is identify bad jurors. You don't want to know who your good jurors. You don't want to ask any questions that might get a good response, because if I do that, then the defense probably knows who those folks are. And what difference does it make? I'm not going to strike them. Why do I care if a juror's an A plus versus a C plus? I'm not going to strike them either way. And so just only negative questions. Two things are wrong with that, I think now. Number one, I do think it kind of sets a bad tone. I think that when you just are, every question is negative and all the feedback you're hearing is negative, it kind of does snowball a little bit with the other jurors who are kind of okay. They kind of start going, yeah, that kind of makes sense. I don't think it really poisons the pool, but it just kind of sets this bad tone for the case. But number two, I think that these days, I think that you really can keep good jurors. And there's a couple of ways, and we're going to be teaching this at TLU in Vegas. But there's ways that I've learned that you can keep good jurors. And so now I do things a lot differently. I always make sure to do something called prehabbing jurors, convince your really good jurors that they're not biased so that the defense can't get them off for cause. And number two, I really like to assess. I found that the really big verdicts these days, you're not going to get a huge verdict just because you get rid of all the bad biased jurors. An okay, fair jury that's not outraged is not going to give a huge verdict. So I want to assess every juror, and I want to know who the really great jurors are, because I need to keep them on there. And if there's some great jurors, if there's a couple great jurors on there, I may pass and be okay with the jury and keep one or two jurors that aren't great to try to protect those jurors. That's probably the biggest thing in my evolution is just, it's not just all about all negative in jury selection. It's kind of assess all the jurors. Don't just spend all your time identifying bad jurors. Look for those kind of jurors who are capable of being outraged. Because if you don't have a jury that's capable of being outraged and having really strong feelings, you're just never going to get a huge verdict. And there's some ways that you can, kind of precondition it too that I think are very effective. And so the other thing that I learned too, and I'll make one more point before we move on, is that I have just learned that contrary to what a lot of lawyers think, there is no such thing as a good or bad juror generally. I think I used to think, and I think a lot of lawyers still think today, if you just ask them general questions, nothing to do with the kind of issues of the case, like you could figure out who a good juror is and a bad juror. Oh, that's an engineer, and they're, maybe they're Republican or conservative, and they think there's too many lawsuits. Like, that's a bad juror in any case. Like, I'm going to strike that person every time. That juror may be great for you depending on the facts of your case. There's no such thing as a good juror. You may have like the sweetest, smiling preschool teacher who thinks that, that lawsuits are great and the verdicts are too low and all these things. That juror can defend you in the right kind of case. And I've done, and one of the beauties of doing all these focus groups and online case studies is sometimes we'll use the same people just to kind of see. And I found the same juror who's awful in one case. And Claire, my wife, Claire may say, oh, I've had that person before. They're such a defense juror. And they're like, hey, guess what? They just, in this online case study, they wanted to give $15 million. They were great in the facts of this case. So there's no such thing as a juror who's just like across the board, good or bad. Every single juror, no matter how bad they may be in one case, could be great for you in a different kind of case. It just depends on the issues of the case.
So you're saying you've learned to look past what would normally be your stereotypes of people. For example, engineers, or not to be, or example, a lot of times, I don't want any Asian jurors. Asians, don't give money, right? I mean, you hear people say that around LA. I mean, I do. I know I don't know if it sounds racist or not, but still people say and believe it. So
yeah. There's all these cliches. It's funny. There's all these cliches. I always hear lawyers say things like, I would never keep this. You could never convince me to keep this on my jury, whether it's, engineer or Asian or accountant or whatever it is. Or lawyer is a big one too. And I'm like, You can't say that. You're going to strike. I mean, even if a lot of them are bad, if you do that, you're probably going to end up using some strikes on great jurors, because some of those jurors can be great depending on what they say. And keep in mind too, like when you have that rule, I find they come from one or two places. Number one, it comes from like you had a bad experience with like one lawyer on your panel. It's like that's one guy, he might have been a terrible juror, but if you get another lawyer someday who does a different background and they say totally different things, don't worry about it. And the other two things too is a lot of these stereotypes come from, you get, oh, no accountants, or they're going to feel this way. It's like that probably came from some partner at some big law firm 50 years ago who just kind of said that, and he trained the next generation. And then you have all these weird stereotypes that just can't, where did they come from? They came from somebody like 50 years ago. So, never subscribe to stereotypes. Just listen to your jurors, be open-minded about them. Don't worry about the labels or their demographics of their jobs. Just talk to all the jurors like that might be good or might be bad.
And you just mentioned your wife, Claire, who also is a trial consultant, jury consultant. So tell us how she came about to be in the business with you. Because
Right.
you and her and the Campbells are the only, the only jury consultant couples I'm currently aware of, but there's probably a couple other ones out there.
As far as I know, yeah.
We got both of them, all of them coming to TLU. We're very honored.
Yeah, exactly. And the rallies probably right too. There's a lot of like good, husband, wife, power teams. So Claire, no, I mean, Claire, people always ask, did you meet through jury consulting? That would have been kind of cool if she was on the other side of the room from me, but no, that's, so we were married first, and then, she was doing some other things, but she would always come and help me on the weekends doing focus groups, just kind of rounding up the jurors and watching. And she, for a while, she was thinking about being a lawyer, and she would talk to the lawyers and, should I be a lawyer? And they would always say, no, don't be a lawyer. You shouldn't do it.
I know
Don't do it.
people always say that. Don't be a lawyer. I'm like,
They always say
being
that.
a lawyer
Yeah.
is the coolest job, but
I know, unless you love it. But so
Right.
she, one day she was just like, I find what you do interesting. I kind of want to do what you do. And I was like, sure. So she wasn't really happy with what she was doing. And she just spent probably 2 or 3 years just kind of shadowing me, coming to every focus group, coming to every trial. She'd sit in the back of the courtroom and watch the jury selections. A lot of times she would give me good information. She'd be like, I remember there's one time that she heard something one of the jurors said in the back row in a trial. And she was like, this is what this guy said. And I was like, okay, he'd be great. And then he comes up in the panel. He doesn't say a word. What he said in the back was like, I would love to be a jury. I always wanted to be on a jury. I'd love to be on a criminal jury. And he comes up, he's this pastor, doesn't say a word in voir dire. But I knew from that, and given what the case was, I was like, he would be great for this case. And so he didn't say anything, didn't raise his hand at all, because he probably wanted to be on the jury. And he was our foreperson. He was great in that case. But so Claire did that for a long time. And then eventually it was like, you're good to go on your own. And she's been killing it ever since. I mean, she's been probably doing it for about 10 years. We had our first child. And then once, after a few months after that, she was good to go. And so it's kind of like cloning myself. Like I can be in 2 trials at once. I can do a trial and she can do a trial at the same time. She actually is so good. I mean, this couple of months ago, I think a month or two ago, she picked 4 juries in 1 week. I don't know how she did it. It just worked out perfectly where, one was a federal trial one day and one rap, it was crazy. So, I mean, that's gotta be a record or something.
that's gotta be, because even the timing of that, especially in LA, that's not exactly, I mean, the timing to get each jury selection completed in 1 day, that's amazing.
Oh, it's crazy. Yeah. I don't know how she was able to do it.
Even schedule it and think you're going to make it. Like that took a lot of courage, right? there.
Yes. Oh yeah. Yeah. No, it worked out. I've done 3. I think a couple times I've done 3, but 4 is just like, maybe I'll try to do 5 someday.
No, don't try to outdo your wife. You'll be in trouble.
No.
Don't try to do your wife. Be in trouble. All right. So what would you say is, everybody asks us, what would you say is a reason that verdicts have such an uptick after COVID? What factors would you attribute it to?
I would say the biggest one is there's something about COVID. I mean, I can tell you some of my theories. There's something about COVID that really changed how people feel about corporations, for sure, employers on the employer side. That's why you've seen, I think, so many employment verdicts just take off. They saw a lot of employers, I think, lay people off even when they're making tons of money, or use COVID as an excuse. A lot of companies, now these days are like they cut corners everywhere to save money, and they said it was COVID. And now, how many companies today are still being like, oh, we don't do that anymore because it's a supply chain issue. And you're like, it's not a supply chain issue. It's COVID. That was a few years ago. I just think they saw a lot of companies taking advantage of things, and it was already starting to kind of go that way. People were starting to get more and more sick of corporations, and it's just so much more these days. And I think it's that, combined with the fact that, obviously COVID taught us all the quality of life matters a lot. People's quality of life was pretty crappy for a while. I mean, they're like, gosh, it was horrible just being stuck at home for 6 months. Imagine someone who's in a wheelchair or something. But also, I think, and this is partly, TLU and everybody else, and trial guys and everything. But I think plaintiff lawyers are just killing it right now. We know what we're doing right now. There's so much good teaching. I mean, how much good education was available during COVID when lawyers had plenty of time? And, I did some webinars just to keep myself sane. You did a ton of webinars. Everyone was, there was all these great webinars out there, and lawyers have learned. And so I think we've done a better job than the defense side at sharing information and learning and actually having good ideas on how to do things. I mean, Dan, it's funny how defense lawyers all think it's just the reptile theory is the only reason. And they do these motions in limine about the reptile theory. It's like, it's not just the reptile theory. Most lawyers I know don't even really do the reptile theory. There's a lot of good things that we do, and none of it is inappropriate or wrong. It's just like, how do you get jurors pissed off? And corporations have given them plenty to be pissed off about. It's like, we wouldn't be getting these huge verdicts if these companies didn't do anything wrong. It's not like bias that's done it. People are just sick of it, and they want to make a difference in the community. And if they see a case as being really, really important, like, hey, I can send a message about this, they're going to do it.
I think a lot of it has to do, I agree with everything you said, because I don't really know. I mean, there's theoretically people, isolation kind of value, their community, to be able to connect with other people. But I do think a big part of it has been the uptick in education, and not just the volume, but really the quality of it. Because with all these lawyers sitting home by themselves, and even these great ones, it was really important that I think everybody wants to be relevant. And so in that instance, you become really relevant by sharing great information and becoming a great teacher. And I think it's the first time they really realized that, because they're speaking up to that point was just occasional conferences, right? There wasn't, whereas like here, if somebody does not, like on trial, or like the webinar series that we do, if somebody does a webinar and breaks down a verdict, there may be 100 people watching it, but there's a whole nother, with the TLU on demand, where we record everything, like all the live conferences, we record all those, like everything that was just at Huntington Beach a few weeks ago. But everything that will be coming up in Vegas will be recorded. It'll be on TLU on demand. For those people that don't want to go in person, that just for whatever reason would just prefer to learn online. But also because obviously there's 9 tracks in Vegas. So you can only be in one place at one time. So there's tons of content you're not going to see. But for all those people producing that great content, teaching, for them, it's, I think, a greater value too, that more people will get a chance to access to it. And especially with like TLU on demand, because then people can access, that information specifically when they need it. When you need it, it's much stickier in your brain. It's much more relevant if you're listening to, a breakdown of a slip and fall case, and you're working on a slip and fall case. And if you listen to 4 or 5, you get some great ideas on framing your case for for liability, arguing the damages, whatever that, because there's a lot of similarities. But I think that has a lot to do with it too, and just people constantly working on improving themselves.
Yeah, I can't tell you how many people, and one of the reasons I love doing TLU and teaching is I get all these people telling me, hey, and I get this great verdict, and they thank me, and they go, I rewatched your TLU talk like 20 times or something to get ready for that jury selection. And like, how often do you get to watch something, not just one, but 20 times, just pull it up on a library and watch it 20 times and really let it sink in. And I'm sure for everyone that's telling me that, there's people who feel the same way about pulling up Brian Panish's something that he was teaching, or Rex Paris or whoever. I mean, yeah, we just do a great job of coming up with a lot of good ideas and sharing information and everything like that. But
this local lawyer here in Vegas, Patrick King, got like a $1.6 million verdict on an employment case. And when he did a case analysis on it, but when I was prepping with him, he's like, yeah, I should watch D. Robertis' closing on the Edison case like 20 times over. And I just kind of mimicked it, and it works so great. I'm like, yeah, that's all you got to do. See something that works, adjust it slightly to fit your case and yourself, and bam, you're off to the races. You don't have to reinvent it. It's a little more accurate, probably more effective, and a lot freaking easier. You know what I mean?
And I'll tell you one more thing that has been explosion of verdicts too, and it kind of fits with what I said about don't stereotype your jurors. It's one thing to have a small section of the jury population being good jurors for you. I really think that, as much as some lawyers don't like to hear it, Trump jurors are really, really good in a lot of cases. What group of people? I mean, when you get liberal jurors being good for you and Trump jurors being good for you to largest extent, I mean, that makes a huge. Both sides are coming together because Trump jurors hate corporations. They're not too happy at employers. They kind of feel like they don't like the system. They feel like the system is like rigged against them.
Rigged against them. It's all
They
rigged.
get angry. They get
Everything's
angrier
rigged.
than anybody. I know. I mean, like, and a liberal juror may even, let's say it's a sex abuse case against a public school. I mean, they may be great jurors for you too. And they're like, I love kids, and the school didn't do enough. But then they're like, yeah, but I also don't want to hurt the public school system. I mean, honestly, Trump jurors are like, tear down the system. I don't care. I'll destroy this company. They want to punish. When they get pissed off, they want to punish. But I know there's a lot of lawyers who are like, oh, I think that's a Trump juror. We got to get rid of that person. Like, you don't have to be best friends with them.
Right.
They don't have to share all your values. You just have to share the values of your case. And I've had a lot of jurors like that be amazing jurors on a case. I had one was in San Diego last year. It was a $39.5 million verdict. Second biggest employment verdict in California between, DeRobertis had number 1 and number 3, and this was number 2. Our foreperson was like a hardcore Second Amendment Trump juror. He was a really nice guy. He loved our plaintiff, and he was pissed off. And he wanted that. They gave $30 million in emotional distress to a doctor who still had his job. So anyway, when you get that, when you get both sides kind of on your side, that kind of helps.
Who was the lawyer on that case?
Mark Quigley from Greenbroy Lett, great guy. He's their one guy that kind of specializes in employment case.
That's a great.
And Ivan Puchalt too. Ivan Puchalt tried the case with him too. Yeah.
Right, because that's Bruce Broylette was down in Huntington Beach for his first time coming to TLU, talking about the Aaron Andrews trial. That's still a classic trial in Nashville. Harry, let's talk about Vegas, TLU 2024, October 16th through 19th. As you know, there's going to be 9 lecture tracks and 20 workshop tracks. And one of those lecture tracks is going to be the trial consultants. So that way people can learn from various trial consultants, their different philosophies, compare and contrast, and say perhaps which one would be a best fit for them for the kind of cases that they're working on. Because not only are you coming, but we also have Sari De Lamotte, Jesse Wilson, who wrote From Victim to Victor. Sari wrote, of course, she wrote
Hostage to Hero.
Hostage to Hero. I don't know how I always have a blank on that. It's crazy. But besides that, like Eric Oliver's coming, David Ball, Sonia Chopra, and Jessica Brylo, I think. And, Sean Claggett does some trial consulting, so I think he might present on that, and Philip Miller. So we have this big range of trial consultants coming. You're going to be speaking for 3 hours. So tell us about each one of those hours and what people will learn and how to help them become better.
Sure thing. I think the first day we're going to be teaching, basically, we talked about this the other day, speed voir dire, speed jury selection, kind of how Joe Freed teaches speed trials, right? With the idea that so many judges these days, and I don't know about the venues that you guys are in because I'm primarily in California. I know some venues, you have very little voir dire. Colorado, they give you 20 minutes max for voir dire. In California, I mean, a lot of lawyers are used to some judges giving you plenty of time, and you want 2 days to pick the jury, that's fine. But a lot more judges, these days are really being strict with time limits. You're getting this jury pick today, and I've had so many judges say that, and also without much cause challenges. So I'm going to be teaching you how do you still pick a great jury even with super strict time limits and almost no cause. Because if your whole game plan is I take my time, I need a lot of time to ask a lot of questions and to develop cause, and I get every trial I get 20 people for cause at least, or some people are like, oh, I got 30 last trial, I got 50 last trial, which is great if you can, but guess what, you're gonna once in a while run into a judge who's like, not in my courtroom. I've had judges say, I don't give cause challenges, and they mean it. And you're going to get 30 minutes to voir dire the first 18 jurors, and that's it. And I'm going to cut you off right at 30 minutes. So, what do you do? That you got to be prepared for that scenario. And so for me, I don't mind that at all. I mean, so I'm going to be teaching how do you get a great jury? How do you do an efficient voir dire without a lot of time and knowing that you're not going to get a lot of cause? And so that's what I'm going to be teaching the first hour. And so I'm going to be teaching what are the questions that are important. How do you budget your time? I'll probably be talking about some specific cases. I just talked the other day about 4 cases where we did that recently. We picked a jury in less than a day with almost no cause. One of them is going to be Omar Qureshi's case, and Omar is going to be we're going to be doing a TLU webinar on July 23rd about this case. It was called Wong versus Santa Monica Malibu Unified School District. It was a $45 million physical kind of abuse from a teacher's aide verdict in LA. And we had a judge. It's like, you're going to be given an opening statement by 2:30 this afternoon. That's what you're doing. I don't really give much cause. So we'll talk about that one. We'll talk about the one I did with Nick Rowley earlier this year and the Nick Rowley team, which is amazing. It was the Dugan versus Tesla case where it was like 60 point something million for a TBI in Indianapolis, which probably was one of the biggest verdicts, if not the biggest verdict in Indianapolis. That judge was like, you don't have much time. It's not like Nick got to talk for 2 days to the jurors, and he had to be super efficient. We got like less than an hour per side. And then I'll talk about a couple with that I did with David D. Robertis. His last two big verdicts this last year, both less than a day. The Callahan versus Marriott, $20 million failure to accommodate, disability case was in San Francisco. The judge was like, you're starting on Thursday and we're not going on Friday, and you're opening on Monday. And so we had to pick that super quick. And then the one, the Kaiser verdict, the Gachalian versus Kaiser, $41.5 million with the judge who makes you voir dire the whole room at once, downtown LA. And I think he gives you something like an hour or something. It doesn't matter. If he gets 70 jurors, if he gets 40 jurors, whatever, you got an hour. That's all you got. And so, I'm going to be teaching how to do that. So what the heck do you do? I mean, and the basics of that are less questions, more open-ended, better quality questions where you're talking to each juror, and just a couple of questions really only. But so I'll be teaching you, well, what do you ask? And what are the key questions? And how do you ask a good question that just one or two questions tells you everything you need to know about these jurors? You can do it, but it's got to be the right question. You got to ask it the right way. So that's going to be day one. Day two is going to be talking about how do you assess really good jurors? Because I talked earlier, right, about like not every juror who's okay for you is going to give a huge verdict. So how do you figure out who are the jurors that are capable of giving a humongous verdict and making a difference versus who are the ones who are going to go, technically you win the case. Here's $1 million. $1 million is a lot of money, even in a wrongful death case. Like what difference is it going to make if I give more than that? So how do you assess, like, what am I looking for? What are the telltale signs of a really great juror? And one of the things that you hear from a juror that you may think is good for you that for me is a red flag of like, this juror is just not going to be great. And also that goes into, I think, writing voir dire questions. What do you ask in voir dire? How do you ask the questions that identify who the really good people are without necessarily letting the defense know? So I'm going to be teaching all about what you're looking for in a good juror, what to be asking, how do you get those good jurors on your panel and make sure that you have a jury capable of giving a huge verdict. And then day three, I think, is going to be really, really interesting. I'm going to have probably a few really great lawyers that I've worked with on these cases. Hopefully, D. Robertis can make it. Hopefully, people like Omar or Rowley or someone like that. I'll figure out who it's going to be. Natalie Weatherford, I think I'll try to get her to be there because she did an amazing job. We had a couple of years ago, we had a $102 million sex abuse verdict with her. But we're going to be doing a live demonstration and a breakdown of mini opening, prehabbing, which is what the part of the voir dire that I think is so important in keeping good jurors. How do you convince really good jurors to understand that their strong feelings they have are not biases? So how do you keep the good jurors from getting off for cause and saying that they can be fair? And then
when prehabbing also go to your jurors who are going to be cause challenges, getting them locked in for cause and to resist being rehabilitated by the defense or the judge? Is that part of prehabbing too?
That's a little bit different. Yeah, we could talk about that too, but that's more of trying to get cause. But prehabbing is pre-rehabilitating, which is rehabilitating your good jurors before, because you don't have a chance to come back. If you don't address some of these things like sympathy or distrust of big corporations. There's a lot of that in your jury pool these days if you're suing a big corporation or any kind of corporation. And also, things like, close personal experiences with whatever your case is about. If it's a death case, and you're going to have some jurors who lost a loved one or have really strong feelings, and they're going to go in there thinking, unless you address them, I can't be fair. That's a bias. And to me, you have to understand that's not a bias. But how do you convince those jurors to understand that's not a bias? And so that when by the time the defense gets up there and says, well, how could you be fair? You have these strong feelings, or you lost a loved one, or you've you know what sexual abuse is like, and you have your wife or your whatever, to say, yeah, I know that, but I can still be fair. I'm going to decide fairly for the defense on the facts. I'm going to wait for the defense. Sorry, I'm going to wait for the evidence to decide if I have a reason to be upset at this defendant or not. And so mini openings, prehabbing, which is really important, and you got to do it just the right way. And then also, we're going to be covering voir dire on damages. How do you bring up money, and how do you talk about money in voir dire? I think that's a big one for a lot of lawyers. Giving live demonstrations of how we do it, and then why, and then doing a breakdown where we say, why do we do it that way? Why do we say this and not say that? And so I think that's going to be super helpful doing that. So that's going to be day 3. And then once you do that, and you hear from all these other trial consultants and all the other folks there, I mean, you're going to be ready to try a case. You're going to be hoping that you schedule a case November 1st, because you're going to be ready to go.
You know what's interesting, because there's so many selections at TLU. Because I'm always I'm always fascinated by who's more popular than others. I mean, obviously somebody like a Raleigh or a Panish or a Claggett's could be popular when they're speaking. But what I found to be the most interesting back in 2022 was that the track that was most full, most often, regardless of the speaker, was the trial consultant's track, was the most popular track. And I wouldn't have guessed that from the outset, right? Because, trial consulting is kind of somewhat of a localized thing. I mean, you're California, David Ball's out in North Carolina, Eric Oliver's in Chicago. Obviously the Campbells are in Europe, and they're in Spain, so they're everywhere. That's a big, that's a lot different though if you're doing stuff via internet than if you're doing local stuff, I think. So
yes,
and so everything's kind of regional, but it was just popular throughout the country. So I found that to be very interesting as far as Vegas, and Vegas will be different than it was back in 2022 because this will be at Caesar's Palace, so it's obviously the center of the Strip, as opposed to the Mandalay Bay, which is at the end. We're gonna besides all the great education, we're gonna also have lots of fun because we do a full breakfast and a full lunch for everybody, and then we on Thursday, Friday, and Saturday we have theme parties. So I know Friday for sure is gonna be a Halloween party with live band karaoke, and Saturday is gonna be a beach party. Thursday, there's a good chance it's gonna be an '80s party, at least an '80s band. So we'll see who wants to put on, whatever.
It's always popular for probably the prime years of the lawyers here. If you're like Gen X, I guess. Like if you're anywhere between probably late 50s to early 40s, like you're all about the 80s. So
everybody's about the 80s. Even the young people are about the 80s. They know what era the real music was made, for sure. And also on that, in Vegas, October 16th, Sean Claggett is hosting 144 of his closest friends at Bally High, which is a really nice club here on the Strip. Take them all golfing, and Nick and Courtney are going to take a bunch of people out to Red Rock Canyons National Park to do a little yoga and hiking. I think that's more of the Raleigh speed, very with the nature and stuff. So that'd be very exciting, and so there's going to be a lot of great and fun things to do, in addition to learning a ton and becoming way better at the trial game. Because you just stopped by our last program in Huntington Beach to visit Dee Robertis for the day. So I think that was your first time at our Huntington Beach event, wasn't it?
It was, yes.
And what'd you think about it?
No, I mean, I think it was great. It was like, it was just like Vegas in California, and it was a ton of great speakers. I got to pop in right before I went in Davis. I made sure to pop into a bunch of different ones. Saw Ibiari Sec teaching, saw a couple other folks teaching and doing an amazing job. And it's like anytime that you have that many choices, that's the beauty of yours, I think, is that there's so many great speakers that you don't have time to see them all, that you got to keep coming back, because it's like I can't see them all. I can see them online, yeah.
But also I want everybody that's coming to, because everybody's showing up to a conference because they have a void, they have a need, they know they're not good enough at whatever it is they want to learn. And so this way, by having 9 lecture tracks and 20 different workshop tracks, everybody is specifically going to where their need is at, and we're not simply like telling them, okay, these are everybody gets the same choice, right? When you only have one speaker, because I hate when I walk into a room and I see half the people or 3/4 of people not paying attention, surfing the net, doing emails, because the speaker put a lot of effort into their presentation and have concepts and ideas to share that they think might change people's lives, I hope. But without people paying attention, it falls kind of flat. So this helps alleviate that a lot, because you're exactly where you want to be. And if you don't want to be in any of those places, go out to the pool and get some sunshine, if you know what I mean, or do something else, but just make yourself happy and find your space is really what we try our hardest to do at Trial Lawyers University, Harry, because that way it makes it better for everybody, for sure. So, Harry, I never asked you this, but I never thought about this. I just want to know, like, you're like as a trial consultant, 20 years, obviously working at a high level and you take it seriously, but what would you say is your like proudest moment that you got to work with in the courtroom or whatever had to do with the trial?
Right. I would say there was a time period in, I mean, this is not that long ago. It was in right between like October 2021 and July 2022. So like something like 8 or 9 months where, somehow I was able to get $400+ million verdicts. It was amazing. And like, so, and the biggest one was with my dearest friend, probably my number one, person who's championed me over the years, David D. Robertus. I mean, I'm so happy that my favorite guy to work with is also the highest verdict, that $464 million Edison verdict. But I mean, it was just like, I think we were just on to just hitting all the right things. We got that huge verdict with Natalie Weatherford and Lauren Seri, and school abuse one. Did that $150 million wrongful death case with Jude Basile, the
Right.
Tesla verdict with Bernard Alexander, that first $137 million. So, man, I was like, hey, this is so easy to do it. But, and
I'm a 9-figure guy.
yeah, I mean, like, oh, it's so easy to get a great verdict, a great jury. And since then, have got some great ones. Haven't had any hundreds since then, but I mean, I had a lot of huge ones at 60s and 40s and everything like that. And it's just
Chump change.
nothing to complain about. But yeah, I mean, hitting that one with David was great because David he's funny. I mean, he'll talk to me almost every night after trial how it's going, and he's always so pumped up, and I'm killing him and everything. But in some other cases, the verdicts have not been quite as huge as we would have liked, and I think it's because sometimes he just like, 7-week trial, and I'm like, by the 7th week, they kind of have forgotten the momentum of the first couple of weeks when you were just killing their first 2 witnesses. And so in that case, I was telling him, cut it down, get to closing. And he was trying to cut left and right. So I think he's doing a great job of keeping the momentum going. So I was happy. And that Callahan verdict, that's one of the ones I'm most proud of too, because I feel like that Callahan verdict is the one that I really helped him with all just shaping that verdict probably more than anyone else, of telling him, you got to do this, you got to do that. And he was like, yeah, he did an amazing job of all those things. And, got a $20 million verdict in an employment case where the guy there was no termination in the case. It was just over not giving this guy a workstation or mats, or, he was just super uncomfortable at work and he wasn't being accommodated the way he should have been. But it's a comfort issue and it's a health quality of life issue, but it's not a death case. It's not really quite an injury case. It's not a termination case. And, a lot of lawyers were calling me afterwards saying, how the heck did you guys get $20 million in a case that I probably would have turned down, at intake? So I was super proud of that one and proud of what David's been doing.
Yeah, and he is, besides a great lawyer, he is a great guy. Not the easiest person in the world to get a hold of, but we overlooked that for D.
But when you
The only
do,
one I overlooked for D.
when you do, he's locked in. I mean, sometimes it's hard for me to get him on the phone. It's hard for me to get him off the phone. So, but he's the best.
All right. Well, I think that's everything we have to talk about, Harry, because we're ready to go. All we got to do is keep working you keep working on your presentations for Vegas. I'll keep working on my overall structure for Vegas, and we'll have the greatest trial lawyers event ever in about 102 more days. I think it is. I have to check.
Yeah, and I'll
count down the clock. Harry, thanks for coming today. I know it's July 5th. It's still kind of a holiday in a lot of people's world, but not in ours. And I'm looking forward to. I'll see you on July 23rd for Omar Qureshi's case analysis. I'm looking forward to that, meeting him because I don't know him personally, and breaking that down. So thanks for spending time with us today.
Absolutely.
Look forward to seeing you in Vegas. It's going to be awesome.
Yeah, that's always going to be fun. It's going to be great. I'll see you guys there.
Ready to train with the Titans and set records with your verdicts? Register for our live conferences and boot camps at triallawyersuniversity.com. Start getting your reps in before the big event by going to tluondemand.com to gain instant access to live lectures, case analysis, and skills training videos from the trial lawyer champions you love and respect, as well as pleadings, transcripts, PowerPoints, and notes for a roadmap to victory. Join the group that continues to get extraordinary results. Trial Lawyers University, produced and powered by LawPods.